Florida State. Let me give you a really prime example of this. I had a dear friend and mentor to me. I will be forever indebted to him. He was a past chancellor of Appalachian State University. Wonderful guy, the last good chancellor Appalachian had. And he left in the early 70s. If that gives you any indication. But anyway, he taught me a lot about getting along with people, and he taught me a lot about leadership in many ways. And he and I attended the same church, and we were greeters. Somebody would call us door deacons, and we would greet people as they came in the door and help them find a seat and all that kind of thing. And there was a lady who came to our church whose husband was dead, but whose son was, and they lived together in a shack, and I mean it was a shack. And he was a garbage collector. And Ms. Cox sometimes bathed and sometimes didn't, but she was faithful to come to church. And she wore the best she had in coming to church. And one Sunday, the former chancellor of Appalachian got through with the greeting and went in and sat, as he normally did, toward the back row. And he looks up front, and Miss Cox is sitting by herself. And the chancellor of Appalachian State University gets up from his seat, goes forward, and sits next to Miss Cox. That taught me what Paul is admonishing here. Don't ever hesitate to be with somebody who is of a lowly estate. My mama would say, don't forget where you come from. Folks, I didn't come. I wasn't born into royalty. I was in law school with a lot of people who were in that status. Alan in the back. But I know what it's like to be picked up with the sharecroppers in the old buses and carried to a cotton field to hoe cotton and to pick cotton. Made me not want to do that for a living, but I know what that's like. I know what it's like to be hungry, not have enough money to buy food. And so why in the world would I ever neglect somebody like that? I want to give you one other example, and then Alan, I want to give it to you. My daddy was fired from a pastoral job one time because he paid too much attention to black folks. I'll just leave it that way. I'll not go into detail. And I was 10, 11 years old, and I asked my daddy, I said, Daddy, why are you doing this? Why are you going against what everybody would want you to do? And he said, well, son, let me tell you. He said, when I was a baby, born, he said, my mother went dry. And my daddy, which is my granddaddy, had to find a wet nurse. And it was a black sharecropper lady who nursed me. I nursed at her breast and lived. And he said, I cannot be offensive to the very people who gave me life. That's the attitude we need to have with other Christians, you see, because of who's given us life. Alan, excuse me for being so slow in getting to you.
Hey, no, I just wanted to add an example to your examples.
Thank you.
A different perspective. Everybody remembers Jesse Helms from the 70s.
Yeah.
Jesse Helms, when he left the Senate, and everybody was talking about what a racist he was and how horrible he was, and he was the scum of the earth, the North Carolina racist. Somebody went into the Capitol building and they interviewed people. They got to the guy with the elevator who ran the elevator, and they said, what do you think of Jesse? You know, you're a black man. What do you think of the way he treated you? He said, you know what? That's the only man in this whole Senate and in this whole Congress I respect more than anybody else, because he knew my family, he knew my name, he knew my kids' names, and every time he got on this elevator, he asked me how my family was, how my wife was doing, by name. He said, he's the only one, everybody else got on and ignored me. He's just a black man running the elevator. He said, but that man showed me he cared. He said, nobody else in this whole building ever treated me the way that man treated me. He said, so consequently, you know, I have the utmost respect for that man, and he is not a racist. Now, I'm going to add one other thing, Phil.
Go ahead.
And that is,
Keep preaching.
well, that is, strikes me really hard that this is as much about non-Christians as Christians. In other words, how we treat them as much as we
Oh, we're gonna get to that.
I know we're getting to that, and I know you've mentioned it, but it just strikes me this is a very broad category of how we treat people in general. And so, anyway.
I want to read something to you. And in fact, turn over to if you want to. It's Proverbs 26, verse 12. 26, verse 12. Do you see a man who is wise in his own eyes? There is more hope for a fool than for him. Think about that. I am not a great lover of all poetry, but I do love some of it. I think I told you my mother had a book of 100 best loved poems, and I, didn't have games back then, but I would read that poetry book, and I wish I still had it. I don't know where it is. But I remember a poem by Rudyard Kipling titled "If." How many of you have heard that one? I'll just read it. It's not necessarily biblical, but I think it's along the lines of what Paul's talking about, and it goes back, Alan, to what you're saying too about how we treat other people as well. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you gave your life to broken and stoop and build them up and with worn-out tools, if you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it on one turn of pitch and toss and lose and start again at your beginnings and never breathe a word about your loss, if you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, and to hold on when there is nothing in you except the will that says to them, hold on. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings, nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you, but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son. Let's go get something to eat and we'll come back. Rudyard Kipling. It's just entitled "If." Very easy to find. Let's go. Got a long ways to go and a short time to get there. What's that? Smokey and the Bandit.
While you're all settling in, I just want to, if I could, just relate a little bit to what Alan was saying. As a child of 8 kids in a family, a household of 10 in a small Cape Cod type house, we had 4 bedrooms, a bathroom, a kitchen, and a living area, and that was it. But I will tell you, even though we were in the VA projects, we were well cared for. Unlike some of the other families. But for the most part, it was interesting, and one thing I did have happen, my grandmother used to try to take 5 or 6 of us on the subway to Boston. And she'd go in there shopping quite often, but she would take us in to see the duck pond and get on the swan boats and stuff. Then she'd go over to Kresge's or Jordan Marsh department store, and especially in Jordan Marsh, she'd get on the elevator, and there was a black woman that she knew. And back in those days, every elevator had a lift operator. She got to know her, and she invited her. When we came on, she always treated us all very, very kindly. And my grandmother actually invited her over to our house for Thanksgiving. And I was so glad and proud of my parents for accepting and letting her come into this situation. She was a lovely, beautiful woman that just fell into the family so fast, and it was just wonderful to enjoy that. So I just wanted to share that with you. She had a lot of tough life as a black woman, but God, you really blessed her. All right, thank you.
Well, I think Paul's whole point, particularly as it applies to other Christians, and we're going to shift over to the rest of the world now, but is if we can grasp what's been done for us, then why in the world would we not express that hospitality and graciousness to other believers at least? That is the cornerstone, I think, of what Paul's talking about, with the focus on that laser focus of serving the Lord. Now, you and I live in a world of unbelievers. We get kind of confused about that sometimes, and in the past, at least in the South, where, and we've had some conversations about that, where sometimes even a false gospel is being taught because it's popular. But we do live in a world of unbelievers. So what is to be our relationship to them? We've talked a little bit about other Christians. I'm distressed, even amongst Christians, where this mentality of the end justifies the means seems to be dominant. We see that in politics so often. I think, again, please do not think I'm getting political here. I am not a great fan of Mr. Trump. If I were looking for a friend, it would not be Mr. Trump. I think that he has brought a lot of his misery on himself. At the same time, I don't know that there's been anybody who's been under greater scrutiny than he has been. I don't know of anybody who has been treated more unfairly than he's been treated. So I'm torn. I just will tell you that I'm torn. But the people oftentimes who are attacking him personify this ends justify the means. And that's frightening. And it is not Christ-like. And it is not Christian. Alan's got another comment. We're surprised by that, but
It's kind of an odd thing, what I'm going to say, and I
Alan, I don't know if anything's ever come out of your mouth that wasn't
you
odd.
got a point. I'm not arguing.
Angel knows what I'm talking about. No, I'm just picking on you,
No,
Alan.
no, I got you. I'm not sure if entirely, and this, I hope this doesn't upset me. I'm not sure that entirely Mr. Trump has been treated unfairly, and I'm going to qualify what I'm saying. In some ways, I think, in some sense, he's done some things that were probably less than above board and all.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure he's been treated unfairly. What I am going to say is that clearly, as I see things laid out currently, and I'm going to name names: Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, they have all been treated extremely unfairly because none of them, for the level of incompetency, lying, cheating, stealing, thieving, and everything else they've done, none of them have received fairly what they deserve at all whatsoever.
You know, Alan, I wish you'd just quit beating around the bush and go ahead and say what you mean to say. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
Alan, you'll find that I'm only 5'6", but I'll say what I have to say. I wish I could agree with you that I can't, but what we're finding today is people living by their own principles and their own thinking and their own reasoning for doing something. If the yard needs to be plowed, they'll plow the yard their way. But we're finding that in politics today, whether it's Trump or anybody else. And they make their own decisions and choices and the consequences for those choices many times. And they're not looking for the principle of doing unto others you have them do unto me. They are looking for the principle of Jesus Christ. He's been abandoned in this country, and in my mind anyway. And people are living, and governments living on the way they think it ought to be. If I did everything I thought I ought to do the way I ought to do it, I'd be in a ditch somewhere. This lady to my right keeps me with the baseball bat straight. But anyway, that's the way I see it anyway. Okay.
I guess I'm just saying, I don't think things have been applied across the board fairly.
I don't know that y'all are saying different things.
I agree with what you're saying, exactly. That's
It's what I said. Mr. Trump has certainly brought some things on himself. I'm not denying that, but you know, it's when they create a law in New York that doesn't have a jury trial attached to it, and they elect a prosecutor for the purpose of pursuing Mr. Trump for that, what I think is an unconstitutional law, that's scary. And let me tell you why it's scary. Forget personalities. If that can be done to Mr. Trump, it can be done to you.
Amen.
That's and you know, if these folks think that, look, the kind of government that we've become is a cultural government, which simply means that whoever's in power sets the tone of the culture. And when that occurs, then the goal is for me to get in power to force my thoughts and beliefs on you before one of you gets in power to force your beliefs and thoughts on me. And that's what we have devolved into in this country. That is our form of government, and it is split fairly evenly down the middle in a lot of ways. And so when they do this thing to Mr. Trump, they need to remember that if power shifts, and it will shift in some way at some point in time in the future, and it may even shift from one radical left to another radical left. I mean, it's not just Democrat, Republican, it's not conservative, liberal. We're splintering in this country, and if a minority gets in control, Hamas is a minority, folks. Hamas is a minority, and Nazism started out as a minority,
Well organized.
and gained power and was able to enforce that power on the majority. So I mean, we're tread. I guess from I'm a political scientist of sorts. That's what I'm trained in, essentially, originally. And from a political scientist point of view, we're on dangerous grounds. Take faith out of it. We're on dangerous grounds as a nation over here. I'm sorry.
Yes, regarding ends justifying the means. Ends justifying the means. There was a political show on a three-letter word network. Comes on about 5 o'clock. Anyway, they were talking, reassessing the most recent election, national elections, and the one liberal harpy that was on this panel, not naming names, she was just gloating the fact that this election and the one in 22 turned on the issue of abortion, and how such a great turnout on that issue, pro-aborts, pro-death people, overwhelmed that issue, just drove people to the polls. And there were other ostensibly conservatives on the panel that said, yes, you know, the Republicans, they focus too much on abortion. They need to moderate and all this stuff. And then one of the panelists, who I've just been watching for years, and his growth, I'm noticing some spiritual growth in him, Greg Gutfeld, to mention one name. He said, and it just struck me and kind of convicted me, he said, the people who are pro-life, anti-abortion, they can't and shouldn't compromise their morals just to win an election. They have this belief, they live this belief, I'm paraphrasing them, and they shouldn't, they shouldn't abandon it or even lessen it just for something that they are morally, that's morally abhorrent to them. And I think, and as we go through this, especially into chapter 13, we'll see that it's our faith, belief in God that He is in charge. We have to keep those commandments, irrespective, regardless of what the consequences are.
I agree. There was another comment back here. I saw a hand
Nancy?
raised, I think. Oh,
I just wanted to say what we all know is that the Bible is the guardrails for civilization. As you can study back in the Old Testament and beyond, and in the flood and Noah, without the guardrails, we lose our civilization, we lose our humanity. And I think we're coming very close to losing our humanity with this Hamas and the insanity that's going on because there are no Christians anymore. We're going to be persecuted and prosecuted for our faith. Who would ever believe that they could turn on the Jews that quick in this country? It looked like Nazi
follow the
Germany.
money. Follow the money. Yeah, look at what money's coming into our colleges. But
Yes.
over here, and then Tom's got a comment back over here.
Here we go again.
There you go.
Okay. Series of thoughts.
Not
One,
that you would dominate, or anything else.
No, but a series of thoughts. First of all, nobody wants fair. We all know that. Christianity has established all that. Nobody wants fair, because if I get fair, I'm going to hell.
Yeah.
That's one thing. Law's interpretation. I find it interesting, and I've learned this being a member of an HOA. It's not so much the laws, it's who interprets the laws. And so consequently,
Who's
there
in
could be-
charge?
Yeah, exactly. I'm telling you, I'm
Yeah.
agreeing with what you
Yeah.
said, which comes back to two. There were 10 commandments, and then they added all the law, and Jesus said, it all comes down to two things. And so really, that goes back to what you're saying. It all comes down to two things. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and body. Love your neighbor as yourself. And then I'm going to add this. I had a professor in college, and you might have known this man, but he used to always say, it swings. The pendulum swings. It goes, and some of you have, I'm sure, heard me say this before. It swings left, right, but eventually it swings far left, and eventually it swings far right. He said eventually I don't know, the what? Yeah, the momentum. That would be a good one. The momentum carries it to where it goes full circle. And he said, you know what we call that, don't you? He said, that's a revolution. He said that. And then Jordan Peterson the other day, I don't know how many of you read this, But he made a statement. He said, this is the one thing I ask every Democrat. He said, I have yet, even to RFK, I have yet to, or is it RFK, is it? Yeah, Junior. Anyway, I have yet to hear a Democrat answer this question. How far is too far left? He said, nobody can answer that question. He said, ultimately, that's where we are as a nation. How far is too far? So,
Tom over in the corner, in the back. I don't know if Tom knows what to do with the microphone or not. We're going to find out.
Not to get too political, but you know,
We
always-
haven't yet. I mean, we've not been political at all, Tom, yet.
I hear people criticizing, I mean, wonderful Christian people criticizing Mr. Trump for maybe using a four-letter word that unfortunately we all probably use now and then if we hit our finger with a hammer or something. And yet, he appointed and got past three of the best Supreme Court justices I think we've ever had. The Keystone Pipeline was ready to go into operation. The southern border was getting shored up. I see Mr. Trump, have you seen lions finally catch up with a poor old zebra and jump on the back of the zebra? They finally bring it down and kill it. And Trump accomplished all of that with those lions on his back, the mainstream media, the Democrats. That's the way I see it, and I don't understand why people can't see what he accomplished in spite of all he had working against him.
That's part of what I was saying, Tom. I mean, again, Trump has faults. There's no question that he's got faults. I don't, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Maybe I thought we'd get into it today, but I don't know that we are. But that's okay. I mean, I don't believe in worship in rushing the Lord's word. I don't believe that. So we'll stay here as long as we need to. But I think the only problem that I have with Christianity is equating Mr. Trump with Christianity. And I don't think you're saying that. I'm just making that point that Trump is not our next Messiah. And
Right.
and we've got to, and I think
Far from it.
I think Paul's going to ask us some really hard questions in chapter 13 that we're going to have to deal with. It's here, Frank. I don't like it, but we have to deal with it because it's here. And I will not. I make jokes about it, but I will not jump over the hard parts of the Bible. I just won't do it. Even if I don't have the answers for it, I'll tell you I don't have the answers for it, and some of this I don't have answers for. But we'll get to that, and let's just hold our thoughts about that. I don't want to break this down into a discussion about Mr. Trump, because I think we all agree with Mr. Trump. What he did was wonderful, for the most part. I won't say I agree with everything. I don't agree with everything that most any politicians has ever done, but I don't think we need to lose sight of the fact that Christ is not at the heart of either political party. So let's just leave that there. Tony, you had a comment.
Yes, mine has nothing to do with politics. I'm not qualified to talk on that subject. In verse 15 and 16, I think you mentioned empathy and somewhere along the line, hospitality. At what point is our love too much Casper Milky Toast, and we have to get harsh and say, enough is enough. Stand up and take care of yourself properly, because what you're asking me indicates you're not willing to take care of yourself. Thank you.
Go back to Romans 10 and Romans 12, 10 and 11. There is a phrase there, fervent in the spirit. It's just fervent in the spirit. Tony, and Paul's going to go a little bit further with this. First of all, when we're talking right here, we're talking about fellow Christians. Okay? Okay, and so we need to bear that in mind. And of course, we're not the ones to judge other Christians, but there are a lot of folks out there who call themselves Christians who aren't Christians. We need to understand that. And there is a line between extending hospitality and enabling. And we need to be careful not to cross that line. I mean, is it hospitable to provide drugs to a drug addict? I mean, you know, that's where we get to that point. I mean, if you take the definition of hospitality to its furthest point, then, you know, you would say that you need to provide those drugs, and we do that as a culture. We're providing drugs to drug addicts free. Go to a methadone or Suboxone clinic if you don't believe me. Horrific, by the way. It is a cottage industry to keep people addicted to drugs. Don't get me started on that, but I stayed in trouble as a judge because I attacked Suboxone clinics, and everybody thought I shouldn't do it, but I did. I hate them with a passion. Goes back to hating that which is evil. Suboxone clinics and the way they're operated are evil. The concept behind Suboxone and the original concept was you get them on this drug and you wean them off slowly. They don't. They can't make money doing that. They have to keep them addicted to it, and so that's what they're doing. In order to make themselves more profitable, they keep people addicted. Do you know what you do? You know what the penalty for violating one of the terms of your Suboxone agreement is? They increase your Suboxone level. They increase your Suboxone level so that they can taper you back off again. It does if money is the object. You see how warped we are? But that's aside from your point. The Spirit needs to guide you. And when we say fervent in the Spirit, we need to follow the leading of the Holy Spirit. And Paul's going to say, basically, you got to have some good old-fashioned common sense. You got to back up your hospitality with, do I want to be hospitable and bring an ex-murderer into my house for Thanksgiving dinner? I need to think a little bit about that. You know. But anyway, I hope that answers your question. All right, let's look at, beginning with verses 17 and 18, Paul's going to tell us a little bit about dealing with other people. And he's going to say in verse 17, and Tony, this is going to speak to a little bit of what you're talking about. Verse 17, repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. This is the attack that Paul's making on this end justifies the means. Christians ought not to resort to clever political manipulations to further the kingdom of God. As much as I would like to do so. I grew up in politics where the idea was to cut their heads off but not to let them know it till they go to nod. You know? Sneaky politics. But that's not right. We don't need to further the things of God. That's saying God's not able to take care of himself and we're going to have to do it. Whoever believes that would make a great Mexican athlete because they sure can throw the bull. There you go, Tom. There's your one-liner. Okay? Now, I want you to listen to verse 18. Well, before that, I want to say to you that he also says, provide things honest in the sight of all men. That's really what he's saying there in the second part of 17. Give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. Ron's got a Bud. Ron's got a comment right back here.
First of all, I want to thank you, Gerald, for showing up because it takes the monkey off of my back because I'm the last newbie, okay?
Yeah, Ron's a regular now.
I'm regular.
Since Gerald showed up, Ron's regular.
I can't think of a harder job for a Christian than what is said in Romans 12:17 as a judge. Because here you are confronting evil, but you have a heart of a Christian. So I would like to hear how you executed your job in the midst of that very challenging verse. How did you handle that?
Not well, probably. I dealt with, Ron, all sorts of people. And the law is the law is the law is the law. But discretion is built into every level of the law. Let me tell you why I say that. You get stopped by a police officer for some, hopefully, minor infraction. That interaction has lots of levels at it. First of all, I would almost bet that if you see a police car on the road, there is a natural tendency to look down and see, how fast am I going? Okay? So just their presence is a cause to obey the law. Then if there is a blue light that shows up in your rearview mirror, you immediately wonder, which one of us is he trying to stop? And if he is trying to stop you, he walks up to the window, he gives you a ticket, whatever happens to the ticket after. At every level, there's discretion because I don't know, I have been stopped by police officers and not given a ticket, but they got their point across. Okay? When I was a young man, I dated a highway patrolman's daughter. I had a daddy who was a preacher. Okay? There was no hope for me. I got caught by my girlfriend's father for speeding. George Baker would make up two of you all. His head, if he put the Smokey Bear hat on, filled up your whole window. Particularly when he stuck it in and got in your face. Anyway, George had me dead to rights. He had me for speeding. He said, Phil, I'm not going to give you a ticket. But he says, I'm going to tell you what. I know your daddy, and the next time I catch you, I'm going to call him. And I understood. And let me tell you, George Baker never saw me speeding again. That's not to say I didn't speed, but I made sure George Baker wasn't anywhere around. Because the fear is the beginning of understanding. And I say that, I'm going around this long ways. I think my goal was to correct what was wrong. And sometimes you have to sentence the individual. Sometimes you have to sentence the crime. Let me tell you why I said that. If the crime is a nonviolent crime and it's a first-time offender, then you can look at that individual and say, what can I do to prevent him from doing it again? Because that's really why the police officer is giving you the ticket. It's a safety issue. He doesn't want people speeding around. You don't want people speeding. You really don't, even though you're perfectly capable of driving your car at 80 and a 55. Somebody else may not be. And so we try to curb that concept. Well, just the fact that the officer stops you may be enough to do that. He may have to give you a ticket to cause you to come to court. Maybe that's enough. Maybe I have to give you a harsh penalty to stop you. Maybe I don't have to do that. So when people would come to me with a crime that was not a bad crime, particularly a young person. I wanted them to see the consequences of their crime. And every time they came before me, it had to be worse than it was before. And Ron, I will tell you, I was fairly free to give out nights in jail. Nights in jail. And I would tell people, look, it's where you want to go. I'm going to let you go down there and spend a night or two. If you want to go back, we can arrange it. You know, but you go down there, you get a taste of it, see how you like it. And if you like it, we'll just hook you up. And for a lot of people, that was enough, you know, to do that. Then there were times when the crime itself was so horrific. It didn't matter how good the person was. Let me tell you, the worst sex offenders are churchgoers. Your children in your church are in far more danger from people who attend your church regularly than they are from anybody who would come in from the outside to harm them. I'm just telling you straight up. And if you mess with a child or if you mess with an older person, you went to prison under me. And I wrote you off. I didn't care what happened to you after that. I will tell you that 2 of my best friends in all the world I put in prison. Yeah. I've got a fellow I put in prison right now. If I was to call him, he'd stop what he was doing, come down here to Charlotte to help me. Because he found the Lord. And see, that's the difference. And I was not supposed to say anything about belief when I was in there, but I was taxed with finding out about an individual in order to determine what the sentence ultimately could be. And about every session, I would have some little fellow wear a cross around his neck, stand before me, and I'd say, "What's that you got around your neck?" "What's a cross?" "What's that cross mean?" And pretty soon, about 400 people had heard the gospel. They didn't know it, but they'd heard it. And some got it, some didn't. I'll tell you this one fella. I think I told y'all this about the fella from Mountain City who came pretty serious crime and told me that he'd found the Lord in between the arrest and he wanted me to send him out so he could preach the gospel, free him up so he could preach the gospel. Found out he was lying to me. Ron, that was one thing you didn't do to me. You didn't lie to me in court. But I found out he was lying to me, and so I gave him about 4 years in prison. And I told him that I had found a ministry area for him. The Lord had laid on my heart to give him a place to go preach, and they really needed the word. And here it is, for 4 years, you get to go preach the word of God at Central Prison. So, I don't know if that answers your question. It was a very difficult job, and it was becoming increasingly difficult because the one thing that offered hope for these people, they wanted me to keep out of my courtroom. I was... Oh, listen, Ron. I can't tell you the number of times where I had no idea what to do. And I can't tell you the number of times where I just said it's time for a recess. And I'd go back and shut the door and not let anybody in there, and me and the Lord would talk. And I can't tell you the number of times that something came to my mind that I believe was from Him. And there were other times, I think, where, and this goes back to, please do not misunderstand what I'm saying to you. I am not constant in prayer. I wish I were, but I'm not. But I try to be sometimes. And I think that constancy in prayer, the Lord gives us things without us just getting down on our faces and asking Him for it. I think there are promptings from the Holy Spirit that come to us every day. We need to have the discernment on our part, and you get discernment because you stay close to the Lord. The closer you get to the Lord, the greater your discernment is as to whether this message is from the Lord or from some other source. But it was very difficult.
Well, I think it speaks to the the importance the Lord has for those who are in that position to have wisdom, and you mentioned this key word, every law has some degree of discretion. But this is as challenging, more so than in kingship. So being a judge, I can imagine the tremendous responsibility that a person would feel for doing the right thing according to both the law, but also his biblical training. So it's a dividing line for many people, and they fall off purposely because everything, as Charles Krauthammer once said, everything is political, or can be.
Yeah, it is.
And so it strikes me as I read 17, what enormous responsibility you must feel, a person like you must have felt, and people today, and how widely the gap between those that execute according to good conscience, good judgment in the law, and those that go the political route.
Once you let politics enter your courtroom, you are in grave danger in your abilities to carry out justice. It was interesting what I think you said, Alan. Everybody came into my courtroom seeking justice. Nobody wanted it. They either wanted mercy or they wanted revenge. One of the two. You know, it's, I honestly don't know how anyone could be a judge without having a close relationship with God. I don't know how anybody, there were laws, I don't know whether you all realize this or not, but there were laws up into the 50s and 60s that required, in order to be able to run for office in the United States and in all the states, you had to express a belief in God. You could not run for office as an atheist, and we took that out, and we've been going downhill ever since. Now we got a member of Hamas in Congress, just saying it bluntly. But Ron, there came a time when I couldn't do it. And I promised myself, and mainly myself, that if it ever got to the point where it was affecting me, I would quit. And I could have hung on a little while longer, I know, but it became pretty obvious to me that the Lord was saying it's time to move on. And the young man that took my place, I played politics. I organized my retreat in a manner so that one individual would have to be appointed, and the young man that followed me has done a wonderful job. He's a great Christian man, and now he has, after 7 years as a Superior Court judge, he's finishing his term, and he says he's had enough. So we'll pass it on, and the fellow that's taking his place is another wonderful Christian man. So I feel comfortable, but we're running out of them. We're running out of them. And I think even with, you go back to what Mr. Trump did, those judges have also done some things which were unchristian-like in their renderings. So I'm not picking on them. Look, I think they were probably three of the finest that he could have chosen, Tom. I agree with you, but we can't depend on the Supreme Court to be our basis for morality. We can't depend on the judge to be the basis of our morality. The law is flawed, guys. The law is based at best it can be on generalities. And there are always exceptions. And you have to be careful when you see those exceptions to identify those exceptions and to understand why they are exceptions and should they be treated differently. Doc, it's the same thing with you. You know, you may treat the patient that has the same disease a little bit differently than the next patient who has the same disease, depending on the physical propensities of that patient. Same thing with being a judge. But Paul says, the non-Christian's not concerned with your doctrine. They don't care whether you're a premillennialist or postmillennialist. But they do care if you're honest. They do care if you treat them correctly. They want to know if you tell the truth or you don't tell the truth. He wants to know if you pay your debts. It's hard to explain to somebody how to become a Christian when you owe money and you won't pay them. I'm so thankful that Paul put this next verse in here. Verse 18. Oh, where to? But let me do this first and then we'll quit. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all men. I love it because there are just some people you can't get along with. Paul gives us an out. I want you to remember this when we get into chapter 13. The Bible says, as much as lies in you, much as it depends on you, just do the best you can. I told that to, I think I told you about the, Ron, you probably weren't here, the 40-some-year-old man who had raped an 8-month-old little girl, front and back. She'd had to have reconstructive surgery as a result of what he did to her. Probably the worst case I ever saw, to be honest with you. I ended up giving him 45 years minimum. And he looked at me and he said, I just don't think I can make that time, Judge. And I said, I understand. Just do the best you can. I don't think he lasted very long. Thank y'all. Now, we won't be here next week because it is Thanksgiving, but we will jump in. Come back ready to, some of the things we've talked about today are just the surface of where we're going, okay? Because we're going to get into how we're supposed to hate Mr. Biden and how we're supposed to lead the revolution to overthrow the government. That's what we may want, but that's not what Paul's going to teach. See y'all in a couple of weeks. Thank you so much. I thoroughly enjoy being here with you.
Hello. Okay. We're going to put 2 tables together. That means the inner row chairs need to be moved out. So 2 and 2, if you can visualize.